Hey everybody, it's Dr. Keegan back with another video lecture for our class, Gender and Popular Culture. Um, we are continuing our short 2-week unit on DIY forms of pop culture, particularly considering subcultural pop culture. Last week we took a look at the use of zines by certain subcultures as a form of DIY cultural production. And this week we are looking at YouTube, particularly trans people's uses of DIY video and vlogging to document um, their experiences of trans identity and also to counteract cultural stereotypes about transness. Um, so I wanted to start you out with this image because this is actually the same person. And we see a lot of these sorts of uses of photography and editing by trans people to assert continuity of identity across gender transition. So it's typified by this kind of before-after structure. But we're going to get into today some of the nuances of how trans people use um, sort of like DIY video platforms to create different sorts of narratives about trans identities. Um, so before I get started, I want to mention thank you to those of you who turned in your paper or project proposal. I'm still missing it from a couple of you. If you haven't turned that in and you've gotten a 0 from me in Blackboard, that doesn't mean you can't still submit it. So please do follow up with me about getting something turned in so I have a sense of what you're thinking about doing for that project. We really only have about a month to 5 weeks of class left. You're going to be doing some research, some outside research on the text that you select. So it's really important that you pick something and have a good idea of where you're heading well before Thanksgiving so that you can do the research exercise I'm going to set up for you. Okay. So if you haven't done that yet, reach out to me. Let me know you're doing it. Okay. Let's get started. So we talked about zines as one example of DIY or do-it-yourself cultural production that can function as popular subculture, right? It can circulate within a specific political or identity-based subcultural space or milieu. Vlogging is another example of this. It's a little different because it's a digital format, right? So vlogging is actually short for video blogging. Um, and it is a form of diaristic video practice. So not all YouTube content is vlogs. I want you to understand that. YouTube hosts a lot of different kinds of video. Only some of it is the kind of talking head, confessional, diaristic practice of just recording a life that vlogging actually is. So first of all, it's a subcategory of the type of video you find on YouTube, and it's made by everyday people, right? Some vloggers have really big audiences, but what distinguishes them from professional media content is that they are self-generated, non-professional people, right? The content of vlogs is generally the vlogger filming themselves talking or performing, and then posting video for followers who are interested in following along with their life or events in their life or some sort of documentation of something that's happening. For trans people, that's often medical transition that's being documented, but also struggles with oppression, with family dynamics, dating, discrimination, right? Things like that are documented in IRL, right? In real life. There are more sites than just YouTube where this is done, but YouTube is by and large the most popular one. TikTok sort of counts now, although TikTok isn't long form media, and vlogging does tend to be long form, meaning people talk for quite a while. The videos are long and fairly unedited a lot of the time. What really constitutes the quality of vlogs is their amateur nature. They're not made by media professionals, generally speaking. They tend to be amateur productions, very personal and confessional, meaning sharing true details of a true life with anonymous others. In that way, they are a little bit like zines, kind of, but more personal, right? The readership is anonymous or the audience is anonymous for vlogging, but you get to know the vlogger very well. With zines, the writer is often anonymous as well. Um, these qualities are in contrast to professionally objective video news media. So vloggers are giving you their very personalized experience. They're not purporting to represent journalistically any kind of objective idea or coverage of a topic. Um, Vlogging is a fairly new media format. It was really only made possible by the development of open source digital video streaming technology, which didn't become available to most people until the later part of the first decade of the 21st century. So YouTube has really only been around for about a decade, right? I remember when it really didn't have ads at all. You could just go on there and watch anything without ads. Now it's highly monetized, and it's also scrubbed of a lot of types of content, which has actually presented a lot of problems for YouTubers who find, if they're LGBTQ, find their videos being demonetized or blocked or untagged by YouTube because of the sort of parental controls that have been established on it now. Vlogging is not the first form through which trans communities engaged in this sort of self-documentation. Before vlogs, there were DIY sort of like diaristic sharing communities on places like LiveJournal, in AOL chat rooms, all kinds of other spaces. So YouTube builds on top of prior practices that were mostly in print online among trans people. Um, of course, vlogging takes on the structure of the host platform. So the length of video that can be recorded, the quality of resolution, whether or not the platform is censoring content, which YouTube does now by making some things really hard to find if they're flagged. Sometimes they're taken down, they're made unsearchable, they're detagged, they're demonetized. A lot of YouTubers now have to put their content on private channels, which aren't searchable because of these problems. Right? Or you have to pay to access things because it's gotten more expensive to use YouTube if you want to have a ton of content on there. So we need to think about the platform as a container that shapes the actual structure and form of the video we're looking at, right? So trans vlogging. Also, I know I had my other cat last week. Now I have this one. We just got her about a month ago, and she is ridiculous. Her name is Winnie. She's my Halloween kitty. Okay. So trans vlogging. What's really fascinating about trans uses of places like YouTube is that they really illustrate how historical changes in gender, identity, and technology and media intertwine. Meaning a lot of people actually have come to realize they're trans earlier in life because of the accessibility of YouTube. You can just go on YouTube now and hear trans people talking about their experiences, right? And so it might seem like there's a ton more trans people around. But what it really is that social media and new media formats have made it a lot easier to find out about transness, and that has resulted in people identifying as trans earlier in their lives than they might have in the past, right? So we know that there were earlier internet trans cultures on private blogging sites, sharing hard to find information, supporting each other. A lot of that then moved to YouTube, where people could find it even more easily. And that then, impacts what people think is possible for themselves. It's quite radical to be able to just see trans people in their everyday lives, right? Rather than a lot of folks don't know other trans people or can't find other trans people. So the internet really made that a lot easier. So one thing that is really important about vlogging and why it draws trans creators is because it gives trans people opportunities to be heard and seen by other trans people in a way that was historically unprecedented when open source video vlogging started. When you're talking about these very small minority groups, right, it's very hard to find other people in your community, right? So once there's a ton of video content that you can get access to. It becomes a lot easier to imagine yourself in community with people who are all across the planet from you, right? Um, so one other really powerful thing I think that draws trans creators to YouTube is that it allows trans people increased control over their own self-representation, which we know there are really strong negative stereotypes about transness in our culture. We're kind of going through a period right now where trans people are really being attacked and vilified. I think there's something like over 200 anti-transgender bills introduced nationally just last year, trying to take away rights from trans people. So the open format of YouTube and the DIY nature of vlogging gives trans people a lot more control over their images than in the past, and also the ability to kind of self-identify, develop new language about their bodies, document their bodies in any way they want, right? And this is different from dominant culture. So what we're really looking at when we look at trans vlogs are a kind of new media genre that has been created by a subculture that trans people use specifically to express and integrate their identities while experiencing medical transition often, but both also before and after. And we're going to talk more about genre in the coming weeks when we get into our unit on mainstream Hollywood film. But for the purposes of today, we should just define genre as a form of culture that has sort of set characteristic properties, thematic, dramatic, aesthetic, affective, emotional qualities and components that tend to be repeated in different patterns. So horror film is a genre. There are certain things that happen in a horror movie, right? The situation comedy is a television genre. It usually has a certain setting and cast of characters, and certain things tend to happen, right? Well, what I'm saying is there are genres of new media as well, like the vlog, that are serving a certain purpose, that have certain formal properties and characteristics that tend to be repeated in patterns because of the needs and cultural attitudes of the group making them, basically, as well as the platform supporting them. So I had you take a look at an article by Laura Horak, who's a film historian, called Trans on YouTube, Intimacy, Visibility, and Temporality. And I wanted to talk just briefly about some of the qualities she picks out that make trans vlogs valuable to the creator, right? Valuable to trans culture. Because what she finds when she studies these YouTube videos, and I gave you a playlist of YouTube videos to look at that kind of typify the qualities she's describing. She finds that these vlogs are really highly nuanced responses to dominant attitudes about trans people, right? Which tend to be quite negative, quite objectifying, right? So some of the properties Horak discusses, right, are that the vlogs use realism, meaning depicting things as they really are, as well as the sort of talking head direct address style, which I'm also using with you right now in this lecture, to position trans subjects as, one, real people, not stereotypes or, you know, some kind of weird figment of the imagination, but actual just regular people. And two, experts about their own experiences, right? So they take on the kind of lecture-based format, which is, yeah, just knock something over. Winnie, come on. Right, I'm presenting myself as an expert right now in this video. I have this backdrop that makes me look super fancy. It's not real. I'm centered by the camera. I'm talking right at you about something I know about, right? The same format is used in vlogs because it's meant to center the trans person as an expert about their own life, okay? Two, Horak says they use a feeling of intimacy, meaning you're getting to know the person almost like a friend. You see their personal space, right? Often maybe their bedroom. And immediacy, meaning the person is close to the camera, talking right to you, making eye contact with the camera, right? To resist common depictions of trans people as objects or freaks to be stared at, right? So rather than just the camera looking at a trans body. What we have is the trans person controlling the camera and looking right into the camera and presenting themselves as a subject who's immediately present with you in a sort of dialogue. 3, they promote a culture of affirmation, meaning celebration and acceptance for trans bodies and genders, rather than the dominant culture's stigma and pathologizing of trans people. So those are the first 3 qualities, and there are a couple more. Horak says they also allow the vlogger to practice integrating a changing gender self-presentation, right? Vloggers make vlogs for audiences, but they also make vlogs for themselves to document their own lives. The same way you don't write a diary for other people to read it, right? You write it to create a record of your own experience. A lot of vloggers are both serving an audience, but simultaneously documenting important changes in their lives, their gender presentation, their embodiment. And that takes a lot of work to go from, like I was just showing you at the beginning of this video, this class, right? To go from one side of that image to the other, that's a lot of time and work and labor that goes into managing a gender transition socially and culturally. A lot of vloggers want to document that process. 5, they give the vlogger control over time and editing, which is really interesting to think about from a formal perspective, right? Which gives you a lot more control over how you're seen, how you're interpreted, how you present yourself, right? And this helps the vlogger to aesthetically navigate gaps between, right, a felt identity and the visible body, how I feel inside and how I appear on camera. It gives people a lot of control over how they choose to dress in front of the camera, how they choose to sound in front of the camera, right? In ways that you don't have control over in real life or in a sort of non-trans dominated culture, right? And 6, this is one of the kinds of emerging problems that Horak notes, is that the vast majority of trans vloggers are white, middle class, and would be considered traditionally attractive people. And so she also analyzes this form as developing new sort of norms for trans self-presentation, that, you know, it is people who are attractive and middle class who are really driving the standards of presentation for trans people, and they're starting to be stereotypes about what's a good form of transness versus a less good form of transness because of the domination of this form by white middle class trans folks, right? So that's something else to be thinking about and critiquing and questioning, like, who has the money to have a fast internet upload speed and a laptop that can shoot like 720p or higher video, right? Like, who has access to this form? Who has time to film themselves, right? And then who has access to actually viewing it as well, and in what format? So those are questions to think about. Now, for your discussion group, I, for the week, assigned a trans YouTube playlist, which I'd like you to take a look at. Make sure you've looked at that and are thinking about the properties that Horak says are kind of constitute this subgenre of vlogging. I have another video I want you to watch that I've linked in the discussion group topic sort of post in the discussion group board. So I'd ask you to review this video as well that's linked here. And my first question is, can you just quickly assess, like, how does this video fit into those properties that we just looked at, those 6 properties that Horak lays out for vlogging? Like, how does it reflect what she says about trans uses of vlogging? And I'd like you to pull at least one quote from the article to discuss that. And then once you've done that kind of synthesis with the reading, I'd like you to develop some of your own ideas about how this video might help its creator resist stereotypes about trans people, right? Why would a trans vlogger make this particular video? What is it communicating to us? What is it doing for the trans creator itself, right? And then how is it also maybe helping this person cope with the specific difficulties of trans identification? Like, why make it? Why make it for the audience? Why make it for yourself? Okay. And I'd like you to also practice, again, paying close attention to cultural format, like the format of this pop culture text, right? We're going to be working more and more in the last third of the class with filmic texts, meaning video and film, like as an actual medium. And so I want you to start thinking about the formal properties of a film, like how is it edited? What does it consist? What are the shots and how long are they? How are they spliced together? What does that do? What kind of story does it tell? What is the montage, right? What order do the shots go in, and how does that narrate something for us? The question of mise en scène, meaning, which is a very fancy way of saying, what are we seeing within the shot? What is framed by the camera and why? What's there? What does that communicate to us? What sort of information do we pick up because of what's shown to us? The lighting also. And this video has music, very intentionally selected and edited music. So I'd like you to consider, right, Horak's overarching analysis, how this fits those or maybe doesn't fit those qualities, to provide some individual sort of unique analysis about stereotypes, why a creator would make this, what it does, what it pushes against, what it shows us, what's the point of it. And then I'd like you to, while you're doing that, to talk a bit about the formal aspects that I note here, right? Practice looking at film as a collection of these sorts of formal properties that are working in tandem to tell us something, okay? So that's it for today. I'll look forward to reading what you throw onto the discussion board, and all of you should also have your midterm back if you turned one in for me. So if there are any questions about that, please do follow up with me. And after this week, we're jumping into Hollywood film genre. So I'm looking forward to that. Okay, have a great week.